Today on The Naked Garden, we're going to be actually exploring the world of aquaponics. We'll be learning some of the theory behind it. We'll be learning about how to take care of it, how to build one, and then also how to deal with some of the problems that tend to arise with aquaponic systems. Come join me. Welcome to The Naked Garden. I'm Paul Holofko. Today, we're going to be working on aquaponics. We'll first start out with some of the theory behind aquaponics and how it's being used and how it's different than hydroponics. We'll be then going later on into the actual case study of creating one, just like you see one over here, how to maintain it, and also how to jump-start the cycle for aquaponics, and last, any other type of problems that are associated with aquaponics. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. The theory between aquaponics and hydroponics is really not that similar. They're actually quite different from each other. Hydroponics uses basically chemical fertilizers and chemicals derived from petroleum or other sources to be able to grow plants without soil medium. And soil medium is a relatively loose term because a lot of times they'll use, say, perlite or moss or coconut husks in some of their media for the plants. But the idea in hydroponics is really to not use soil at all. When you separate the ammonium and the nitrate, and you've seen this on pots, you've seen the whites that come up on top surfaces of your flower pots where the nitrogen and the ammonium have been separated and you end up with a salt. Well, what happens is the salts get so high that osmosis can't occur within the roots of the plants, and then the plant can't absorb any more water, hence doesn't absorb any more nutrients, and it's called lockout. And you can get that in hydroponics very easily because you can put way too much of these three chemicals in there. In aquaponics, all right, the plants are fed differently. It actually goes through Mother Nature's natural cycle of fish poop. They make ammonium, and then a set of bacteria take it and they turn it into a nitrite, and then it turns into a nitrate. And if you looked at a nitrate is one of the nitrogen absorbable chemicals that plants can absorb. So now you have to take care of the aquaponics in two fashions. One is you have to be aware of the amount of oxygen that you have in the water, as well as the amount of oxygen for the plants, which is totally different. Remember, in aquaponics or in hydroponics, we're actually doing something quite unnatural for plants. We're not growing them in soil. We're actually growing them in coconut husks or in perlite or in ceramic balls. So the method on how we have to add air to the system is different than it does in the soil system itself. So in aquaponics, we're feeding the plants differently than we're doing in hydroponics. In aquaponics, we're using the fish to feed the plants instead of the chemicals from hydroponics to feed the plants. And in this case, we're actually taking fish. Fish poop comes out of the fish, makes ammonia. Ammonia then is turned into a nitrite by the bugs in the water, and then turns into a nitrate. Well, nitrate is the stuff that's a nitrogen absorbable by plants. So then it's available to the plants. Now there is a little caveat to all of this. We're actually taking plants that not normally grow in water, and we're trying to grow them in water. So you're going to have to do a little bit of finagling around with the plants themselves to make sure that they actually have all the oxygen they need in order to be able to grow. So you have now in aquaponics two places you need to watch for oxygen. One is in the water itself, so you can actually grow your fish, because the fish need at least 18, 19, 20% oxygen in the water. The colder the water, the more oxygen is contented. Number two is you need to have oxygen for the roots themselves. So in this case, we use a form of flooding. If we use any type of other form like a coconut husks or drainage type of flow through, we tend not to be able to have enough oxygen with the microbiology next to the roots, and so then the plants really kind of struggle trying to grow. All right, let's go ahead and start with the actual system itself, since now we understand how the difference between hydroponics and aquaponics. In order to start building this system, you need to have a couple decisions made. One, are you going to feed the fish or are you not going to feed the fish? And that's a particular difference. In the system that I built over here, I don't feed the fish. But I also have the tank out in the sun, which then creates an ecosystem. So let's go through that a little bit. If you want to feed the fish, that's great. The food that you give to the fish, will go and eat by the fish. It will then poop out, go into a nitrite into a nitrate, back into the plants, and then you eat the vegetables and fruits from your plants. Not a problem. If you want to close the system, you have to put energy in it from externally from someplace else. And one place that Mother Nature does that is through the sun. So in this tank right here, I actually have it in the sun. We can't see it right now in the sun, it's because it's morning, but it gets an afternoon sun, and over here you can actually see the algae growing on all sides of the tanks. Now the type of fish that I've used in here is feeder goldfish. So I bought 12 feeder goldfish from the pet store for $1.50 or something like that. And then I got 2 Teopolas, which I went vegetarian type of fish. And the reason I went vegetarian because I wanted these fish to feed off the algae that grows on the side of the tank. It doesn't make for a nice tank and it doesn't make for a nice appearance, but we'll get into how the water can be cleared out in a little bit. In this case, the feeder fish I got from the pet store, and the Teopola, which of course is illegal to grow in California, at least I'm not too sure in the whole United States, but I know it's in California, it's illegal to grow because it's a very invasive species. So they do sell it in the Asian stores. So they sell live Teopola in the Asian store, so I go in there with a 5-gallon bucket. I ask the person who takes care of the fish, the fishmonger, to weigh out 2 fish for me, 3 fish. I actually had 2 fish in here, and weigh it out and then put it in my bucket, and I take it home and dump it in my tank. Well, I have 2 fish in here that used to be this big, and they are now this big. I am not kidding you. And all my feeder fish used to be this one, and you can actually see here, eating offside the tank, you can actually see they've grown this much. I have not fed this tank at all. Everything has been done through the microbiology of Mother Nature and how this entire configuration is built for this aquaponics system. Now there's a couple things here. Let's go ahead and over to construction of the tank. But before you do that, you need to learn how big of a tank that you need and how many fish you can serve and all that kind of stuff. The general rule of thumb for the amount of fish versus the amount of volume of foliage or things that you're going to grow with your aquaponics is generally 1-to-1. Some places go 1-to-3, which means 1 volume of water to the volume of plant growth, or 3 plant growths to 3 plant. And the first thing is sizing. The first thing is learning how many fish that you actually can grow, depending on how much volume of plants you want to grow. For instance, it takes about 1.5 gallons of water per fish in a 300-gallon tank system. In this case, I actually have a 400-gallon system here split into 3 places. And I'm actually growing probably less of the plants than I really need to because I'm still trying to establish my vertical garden and my other methods of how I want to flood and drain tanks. But the general rule of thumb is 1-to-1 for the volume of water to the volume of plant that you're going to grow. Some places can actually grow 1 volume of water to 3 times the volume of plant grows, and then they're trying to stretch it and push it. But again, those are probably feeding systems, and I don't use that since I'm actually taking some of the nitrates that are in the water and then feeding the algae, then feed the fish itself. Also, you have to determine how many fish you're going to have. Well, if you have a 300-gallon tank, all right, you generally divide it by 1.5, which is roughly about 2, so you can actually have 200 fish in here. Well, that's generally, the ratio is 1.5 gallons of water per fish. And here I have probably a couple dozen fish in here. I don't have it totally filled up, and this is a 300-gallon system. This is roughly 300 over here. I have another 100 over there by the lake. I have actually going to a pond that actually circulates in the entire system here. And so I'm trying to keep the ratio down where I don't really have that high of a metabolism. And it also makes it quite peaceful. That's basically the constraints of your system. Again, you want to keep your system somewhat large. I wouldn't start with anything less than 300 gallons because the microbiology needs to stay balanced inside of it So if you have a smaller system, the pH might go off or the fish might take off, and then you have too many fish, and there's too many things to go on. You have more of a momentum, a little bit more of a stability by using a larger system. All right, construction of the tank. In this case, it's outside in the sun. All right, I don't need to feed a fish. So to construct a tank, I start out with 1/2-inch glass and glue it together with tank glue or fish aquarium glue. Now you can't really use DAP that you get in the hardware store because it then irradiates type of chemicals when it dries and then kills your fish. So the trick really here is to stick all your sides together and make sure there are no bubbles in between the glass plates and the edge plate of your aquarium. Put clamps on it and don't put any water in here for about a week. Afterwards, put on a top aluminum bracket. This is a 1x1 bracket, so that keeps the whole thing together. Since this is such a large aquarium, and roughly this is about 6 feet, 5 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet, or maybe 1.5 feet. And I have found out that the walls of the entire tank will actually bow out. So you do actually need support in the top and on the bottom underneath. You have to also put glue, and you put the same type of DAP glue for aquarium glue that you get in a hardware store. Just make sure it's for aquariums, not for caulking your windows. Put it around there and wait a week. It takes that long for it to cure, and that's one of the tricks, else the whole thing will just bust out. Since I built this particular whole setup, I actually built it on a deck on the outside of the house where you can actually access it and you can take a look at it. Well, it's not really much of a looker because we have all this algae on the walls of the tank. Well, there is access. I put access panels into the system, and they're located underneath the deck itself. So I left a couple boards loose underneath the deck so that I can actually access the pipes. You can see here that there's the drainage pipe and the siphon pipe going in and out, as well as there's electricity and as well as command. So between the different systems here, I've actually put in 120 volts, the in and out pipes for each of the ponds or tanks or areas of operation, and as well as signal wires. And the type of wire I use is the same stuff we use for sprinklers. So there's, for irrigation sprinkling system tank, we have a few systems already built in. This system, since it's outside, has an automatic water filler, so we do lose some water because of evaporation, and sometimes there's a leak here and there depending on how the plants are feeling that day. This system is actually constructed with some automation to it. One is, there is one pump that siphons water all the way around the 3 units around the entire backyard. Number 2 is it's automatically set up to the house water system so that whenever gets low water, it fills it up by itself, and that really gets rid of a lot of nightmares. First thing you take a look in here, you'll actually see several pieces of equipment that are going into the tank. I didn't drill any holes into this tank because I didn't really want to fool with it, so I just had everything then go over the top. So there really is only one pump in this entire system. It starts from the pond, pumped into this thing, and then is pumped into the vertical garden, and then the vertical garden then drains it back into the pond. So 20 watts on a solar panel isn't all that bad. Okay. The next thing I wanted to show you is the actual mechanics that goes into this tank. Now, all the pipes for this particular aquarium is gone underneath the ground to the different locations around the yard. There's actually 2 locations. This is like stop number 2 for the water. And inside of here, you can take a look. Here's a water return, and you can see the actual water return. The pipe is opened so that the water comes up, goes around, and slips into the tank itself. That prevents water from dripping and making a lot of watering noises, because then you have to end up going to the bathroom all the time, or you can't sleep at night because you hear this thing going constantly. So I opened it up so that the water just slips into the tank. This is actually a normal watering valve for a sprinkling system. I hooked it up to a float, which is one that's in here, into this box, and there's also another one in the pond. And the last part over here is the siphon. And the siphon is built and it goes into the vertical garden. So this pipe goes down maybe about 1.5 feet or so into the water, and there's a screen at the bottom so that fish can't get sucked up into it. and then it drains all the way across, maybe about 30 feet to the vertical garden. So the way the fish can actually survive without having to really be fed is they poop ammonium. It comes out, it turns into a nitrite, it turns into a nitrate, and then algae then is produced on the walls of the tank. So you let the algae grow on the walls of the tank. So obviously they're sitting here eating all this, and they seem to be growing like crazy. So this is part of the natural process where the fish can actually then use its own cycle or its own stuff to be able to perpetuate its ways. Well, that's how you make a feedless aquaponic system. So the next question would be is where does this energy come from? And energy comes from the sun. The sun produces the light and the heat. It then grows the algae. The algae then is eaten by the fish poop, and then the cycle continues around and around and around again. So that's how the system works. There's nothing mysterious about this, and it's actually in almost a closed unit system. So maybe if we hermetically sealed all this, maybe we can send it off to space, who knows? Next, you need to kickstart your aquaponic system, and that can easily be done in two ways. One is you can put a whole bunch of fish in your tank, and then you wait for about a month or so that the bacteria that is contained on the outside membrane, mucous membrane of the fish, finally propagates into the water and then has enough population to be able to take its poop or the ammonium that the fish creates, turns into a nitrite, and then turns into a nitrate, which is then absorbable by algae. Then the algae is then eaten by the fish, and then the fish poops again, and the whole cycle goes round and round and round. Well, there's two ways to that's one way to quick start it. The other way is to actually use a compost tea bag. This is a compost tea bag that I use for extracts and composting. And what it is, it's a fine screen mesh, about 400 microns from one hole to another. So the microbiology can come through, but a lot of the larger organic pieces don't come in there. Take a little compost, put it in a corner, and then just work it into the water once you have your entire system all set up. That'll muddy up your water and make it look really, really bad. However, it gets your tank started in no time. A week or so, you have your entire ecosystem going in here, and you've got plants that you can put in right away. If you're going to do it the long way, where you just put the fish in there and you're going to cycle your tank that way, I suggest you put a little bit of iron in it, soluble iron in it, and also put some kelp. That will also then feed your plants. So you put the liquefied kelp in here, and then you put a little bit of the iron, because that's one thing that's missing in aquaponics is iron and also calcium carbonate. Put a little bit of that in there, and that'll get your plants going. The pond is really made up of a giant fiberglass bucket. This is a bucket that I got down in Gilroy. It's meant for ponds, or you can use a trough for cows or for goats or chickens if you want, and put it into the ground. So basically it's a bucket that I dug into the ground, put some supports I put it into basically it's a giant fiberglass / plastic bucket that's the shape of a kidney-shaped trough that's used for cows or for horses. And I just put it into the ground and then have the pipes all go in and out of it, and then it goes into this little manhole. It is located in an understory. So I have a peach tree that's located just beside it, and a big huge nicotina off to the left. Well, the best part about this is that it attracts insects. It attracts birds, hummingbirds. I see birds taking baths on top of this blue pot that I put in here that I found in the garage, and I had to use it for something. Put a pipe through the middle of it, and then just floods water up to the top and then falls off to the side. I attract insects here. Make sure you have places for insects to be able to land. Bees can't land directly in the water. They actually have to, you put straw down, or you put some sort of something that they can actually land on and then take their proboscis and suck up some of the water. So you have a closed loop system over here, and on the roof is a solar panel with two 12-volt deep cycle marine batteries running the entire 20-watt pump. That's what it takes to run this thing. So there's really not much energy or not really much effort to keep the system going. I really don't look at it sometimes for months. Next is the construction and the process for the vertical garden. Now, I started out originally with a vertical garden because I wanted to shade the house from the sun in the afternoon sun. We actually a lot of afternoon sun here, and it's actually a perfect place for plants to grow. Well, it turns out that a vertical garden is very difficult to grow because the medium is very small for the amount of volume that you have in your tanks. So I started out with that, and then I moved on to a flood tank. Now, there are two ways to really put plants and grow plants inside of this aquaponics system. One is you can put it into coconut husks with vermiculite and these ceramic balls. And these are like hydro balls, I believe that's what they're called. And it works best, I found, without any other type of media except for the hydro balls or these ceramic little balls. And the plants need a different requirement for growing with oxygen than it is with fish. See, with fish, you can keep 20% oxygen in the water, which then they'll grow. But with an aquaponics system where you have the plants growing in there, you actually have to flood and drain the water that's going to it. So in this fish tank or entire system, you actually have all the microbiology going, and when it gets to the planter where the plants are, it needs to have only a pulse. So what I did here is I put a thing called a bell siphon. Since I want my reliability to be very high, I don't have to sit here and maintain this and do things with this thing other than come and collect vegetables for dinner, which that's basically what I do. I made it so that it is pretty much foolproof or safe or reliable so that I don't have to fool with it. Well, what I did here, I put a bell siphon. And what a bell siphon is a way where you flood a tank or flood something. It goes up, and there's an inner pipe inside there with a little tube that comes out the top. You flood it, it then creates a siphon and then pulls everything down out of the bucket. So in other words, it creates a siphon that pulls the water faster than it goes in. That means you can leave a pump on constantly. So you put a 2 gallon per minute pump in there. Well, the siphon can pull out 4 gallons per minute. So when the siphon comes up and starts, it'll then pull it out twice as fast as it is filling. Then the siphon breaks because of that little tube, and then fills up the tank again. You need to take already established plants that you can buy in a store. So what I do is I seed my plants in peat moss or in some sort of vermiculite, grow the plants until they're about yay big, then remove them out of the box, wash them off until all the soil is off. So here I'm doing it with a tomato plant, and I'm doing it here, and here I'm starting with a fennel. I'm going to do two things here today, and I'm going to plant this tomatoes. The first thing I need to do is take off all the soil that's in the pot. And I just bought this at the local hardware store. I didn't plant this one. Take all the water off. Take all the soil off, and just make sure you have all of it off there, because the more you keep on there, the more you might have pathogenic bacteria or fungus on there. It actually will contaminate your system and give you a little bit of trouble in the meantime. If you have a very, very diverse hydroponic system, it won't really be an issue at all. But it's a really big issue in hydroponics. Hydroponics, you can have an entire outbreak of something, pest or bacteria or fungus, and it will just take over your system. This is a bit more forgiving when it comes to that sort of stuff. Take the plant, take the box off that it's in the plant, and just sprinkle water until all the dirt's off of it. Then make a hole or a crater in the aquaponic bed, and then plant it in there. Now the trick here is to make sure that your water level, as you're going up and down in your aquaponic system, doesn't go above the top of the balls. If you do, what happens is it starts growing algae and looks really unsightly. So I generally have the water level going roughly about 1 inch below the top of the balls of this planter system. So this thing then just cycles 24 hours, 7 days a week. I have a siphon that goes from the pond that then siphons into the tank, and then also then siphons into, or just basically drains into the planter box, and then the planter box then drains into a 12-inch by 1-inch slope drain into the pond. So I have one pump doing all of the processes everywhere. And the size pump I'm using for this particular application is roughly about 365 gallons per hour. So that's basically. Now, you can see here in this aquaponic, you can see in this vertical garden that I've actually taken it apart and started really much over in a lot of stuff. We're kind of middle of the season right now, so it doesn't look all that great. But you can see this particular tomato plant here was half the size a few days ago, and this thing just takes off. I also grow basil. I also grow all kind of herbs. I grow basically leafy vegetables. That's basically the stuff that works really the best. And the other part is you can actually grow fish in here, and you can have a fish dinner. So these two tiapulas that I have in here, which are vegetarians that eat all the algae off the side of the tank, I actually will eventually eat them. So when they get bigger, or frankly, whatever, like I said, I don't do anything to this tank. I just let it sit here, and the fish keep it clean. Once in a while, the kids will come here when they come over to clean the chickens. They'll come here and they'll scrape it off the side. I have this magnet scraper, and they'll clean off some of the sides to see it, but it grows back really quick. I can actually see some of the fish feeding off the algae right now. In the vertical garden here, I have the top of the siphon from the tank, from the fish tank, come down and drop into a bucket. And I made this bucket that has partly a drain. The siphon goes, it goes into the water, into this black bucket, and then off to the left you can see here is the actual drain that drains the water that goes into the drain that goes back into the pond. So that's the overflow. And then whatever underneath here, I have a top and bottom, a top pump, and I also have a top pump or upper pump and a lower pump to feed the different parts of the watering system. And I'm cheating here because I have a vertical garden that I need to actually pump it higher. The other part, the lower pump, doesn't really run at all. It just has a water drain into the bell siphon planter box. Well, you can see that the two pipes, the two pumps, you can actually see the two pumps connected into the bottom of the water, where the water comes from the fish tank. And then there's actually filters in there and screens, things to keep all junk out so it doesn't go into the pump itself. So the water comes through the siphon into the black bucket, through the pumps, or it gets drained off and goes into kind of like a sewer / drainage back into the pond or to the return. As well as the pipe from the bell siphon also goes into the return drain. Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. See you next time. Have a good day.